As a proud American constitutionalist patriot, I'm very happy to say that I was blessed by God to be born in a country that came out of one of the greatest regime changes in the history of mankind. Thank God for George Washington and all the people that supported him, all the ancestors that fought and died, all the people that contributed to the supply chain, all the people that made that regime change come about. As a result, America has been able to provide freedom and democracy to places in the world that never would have had it if we hadn't begun with our own proud regime change. One thing I've really come to love about America in this technical age is when something like this happens, a big news event, the brilliance of a lot of the memes Americans create can be hilarious. There's been some great stuff come out now since Maduro got popped. Now I'm going to spice up this video. I'm going to be displaying some of my favorite ones that I've found so far because these memes about Maduro and the raid down there are just hilarious. Enjoy it. It's interesting how the term regime change has a negative connotation to it. And of course, that's all come from media and the parties. You know, the parties have both used it when it suits their purpose of the day. But the truth is, the term regime change has become synonymous with something bad, when the truth is, the world is a better place because of the 10,000 years of regime change man has been going through as a process ever since the first cities were developed. Back when city-states were countries, regime changes are what made the kingdoms that became the empires that became great and allowed for the progress of mankind. Of course, there was a lot of bad ones along the way. We know that. But regime change in and of itself is not a bad thing. However, you get enough negative media, and it's true what Joseph Goebbels said. He was a Nazi propagandist for Germany under Hitler during World War II. He said if you tell a lie enough times, it becomes the truth. Well, that's what's happening with the term regime change, which is really a glorious thing. If it hadn't been for regime change, we never would have had America in the first place. Look at the great things that happened in the earliest stages of it. Sure, there's a lot of people that are upset about what happened with what they call the Native Americans, the people who had taken it over by the time we found it. Yeah, they've been going through regime change, fighting left and right, all through their own history. There's a lot that can be said about the travesties that took place during the settlement of America, but heck, none of it is worse than what they were already doing to each other. They couldn't have good civilization until the regime change from the Europeans came about. They tried. They had the Anasazis that built great cliff homes out in the Rockies. Yeah, they had cliff homes. They were really accomplishing something. They had built-in air conditioning and heating systems. I mean, these people were good. And what happened? The bad guys rose up and killed them all. They didn't have a strong regime to protect them. The city of Cahokia was enormous. It was the size of London. It was near present-day St. Louis. The Indians had tried. They had their regime. Well, the wrong regime change came along and the bad guys took it over because the regime wasn't strong enough to resist. All because it wasn't a good, powerful regime to keep the bad guys in check. You've got to have a good regime or the people are never safe. That requires regime change to get there. Regime change is the history of mankind. Stop and think about it. South America, regime change settled that. It civilized the people. They had the Mayans down there, for instance. The Mayans, the Aztecs, all of them down there, they believed in human sacrifice. Wanton human sacrifice. A lot of them were cannibalistic. When the Spaniards got down there bringing their diseases, their cholera and smallpox, they were appalled at what they saw. They weren't saints themselves, but my gosh, when you compare it to the butchery and the savagery that they encountered, regime change was in order. Those people live down there today, and they don't have to give up their daughters and sons as human sacrifices because the regime change that came from the Europeans. It's not a negative thing. After the rise of Islam, when they took over all the uncivilized tribes of the desert, became an army and started taking over the world, they moved into Europe. They became the established regime. They were in control of Spain. Back then it was Iberia, but they were in control of it for 700 years. Infidels, the non-Muslims, they had to keep quiet. You know how it is. Everybody knows how the Islamic areas are once they get controlled by the mullahs or the caliphate or whatever you want to call the dictator of the moment. Islam was kept in check by regime change. They got too big for the britches. They tried to go into France. They got beaten. They got stopped. They were marching across the entire Mediterranean area, taking it over. Freedom of religion, free societies emerged in Europe because of the regime changes that forced the Muslims out of the territory they held then. Now we're seeing a lot of regime change as Islam tries to take places over. We've had a regime change up in Dearborn, Michigan. We've had a regime change in Minnesota. They're good and they're bad. Regime change in and of itself is not a bad thing. The problem with America is, yes, we've had some bad regime changes because you go in and you put in somebody, you set it up so a guy like Saddam can take over the country. If you're going to have a regime change, you better follow up. You better not go in and start giving them all kinds of arms and military training and equipment that they can use back against us. I mean, come on. If you're going to have a regime change, you at least got to manage the thing, okay? You got to manage the aftermath. You can't just say, okay, now that we made you a dictator, here's all the weapons you need. Crush your people, threaten your neighbors, become a problem for us. We'll come in and settle it again in another 50 years. No, the important part about regime change is the part that Trump has nailed down there in Venezuela. His best moment in announcing the regime change was when he came out and said the U.S. is going to be in control of this for a while until they get on their feet again. Amen. That's how you do it. Otherwise, you just get the next cartel guy, the next dictator, and it could happen again anyway. It could happen much later. It could happen soon if we quit watching. With Trump and Rubio on the job, I'm not too concerned about that at the moment. But yeah, it had to be a regime change because it wasn't going to get better without it. Let's look at the world wars. They were all about regime change. We won. It was a great source of national pride to be on the winning side in both of the world wars. Regime change, that's what it was all about. Unfortunately, again, it was the follow-up that went bad. The Soviets, the Russians went bad. You know, that's why Patton wanted to whip them in the first place. He wanted to arm the German prisoners and kick Russia back into Siberia. He was right about that, but a bad regime grew up. We needed a regime change. Finally, under Reagan, they broke the Soviets. They broke the will of the Soviet people to stay together. We got our regime change. All of a sudden, East Germany was free. Remember tearing down that wall? Oh, that was Reagan's famous statement. Everybody celebrated the regime change. Regime change was praised. It was a good thing. Once again, it accomplished a lot. These are lasting successes. There has been a lot of success from regime changes that lasted hundreds of years. So no, it's not a mistake. People say, okay, we can have regime change. We can't have violent regime change. That's coming from the left right now. Well, believe me, no dictator has ever said, oh, okay, I'm wrong. I'll walk away. I'm sorry I slaughtered all you people. That doesn't happen. The only kind of regime change you get is from violence. And the people that make these stupid comments, they're only safe saying that because we had a regime change and established a nation with a government where they're free to speak. That was regime change. This world we live on, the planet, is just a very violent place, and man is a very violent species. I mean, you look at it, you know, lion cubs learn how to hunt by eating baby deer, cute little baby deer, okay? This is a violent planet. Mankind is just like the rest of it. Violence always rules. That's why it's important to have good governments with sensible people in charge to keep the violence to a minimum. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes the wrong people get in charge and people are brutalized, and it takes regime change to change that. Violent regime change is the only kind that is ever necessary. If you don't need violence, then they're not that bad, are they? They'll step down if they're asked politely. A peaceful regime change is called a resignation or an election. Take your pick. But when your leadership doesn't allow you to have either one of those, violent regime change is the only solution. The dictators, if you don't use violence, you can't get rid of them. They don't just quit, they don't walk away. So yeah, violent regime change is necessary because violence is the only proven method for controlling violent people. That's why we pay our cops to carry guns. The violence of corruption, the violence of tyranny can only be taken out with better violence from the good people. How do we decide who's good and bad? We've been debating that since man first developed language. The results speak for themselves. The regime changes brought around by the Western world have led to more prosperity, peace, and freedom than anything in the history of the world. No other system has produced so much than the regime changes that came about from the Christian European societies that spread to America, that spread to Australia, created the Western world. The Western world has proven regime change works. Hey, I'd like to remind you right now, I don't know if you're familiar with us, if you're new to us, but I'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe. We're a new channel. Moved everything over here from our old formats. This is just what we're focusing on because this is a lot of work. It really is. Anyway, appreciate you being here. If you want to help us grow, please hit like, subscribe, and most of all, the comments are really important too. Give us your feedback. We got to get the follow-up right. No more Saddam Hussein, okay? We got to make sure that we follow up and we don't arm these people and walk away. That's where the mistakes are made. Right now, we've got Trump in there who's doing an excellent job. He's gone in several times to different countries now and forced some regime change. Iran is falling apart right now because Trump went over and bombed them at every turn. The left and unfortunately, a lot of conservatives have said, oh, we don't need another war. Trump just started a war. He doesn't have the right to start a war. In no case has he started a war. In every one of these instances, he has gone in, kicked some butt with surgical precision, and got the heck out after changing everything. In Iran, the regime of dictatorship still lingered. They're in deep trouble right now. And the only reason why is because the people of Iran were empowered by seeing the military defeat and how fast and easy it was. Yeah, Trump could go in there and just wipe them out. We don't need the war. Trump isn't starting wars. He's not starting a war with Venezuela, which would last, what, another 20 minutes? I'd still like to hear what the casualty rates were in those barracks, you know. Those guys were asleep at 2 o'clock in the morning and just never woke up. We don't know what happened down there. We're going to get more information. But the nonsense about regime change being a bad thing, no. The world can never be a better place without the process of regime changes. There's an element of human nature where bad people are drawn to power and they rise and they get support because people want to share in the bad with them. Regime change is the only thing that has ever stopped bad people from running a country and abusing the citizens. So God bless our regime change. Let's keep it up. We're not done yet. There's a few more places in the world that could use it. It's not our job to go out and tick them all off. When we've got them sitting at our back door like Venezuela in our hemisphere, Russia and China are getting cozy to them. They're sending drugs into America. They're part of an important pipeline, a critical pipeline for getting drugs into America that damages the country and kills people. That kind of regime change is necessary. It came to us. We shouldn't go out hunting them. There's a lot of places that need regime change that aren't any of our business. When it comes to us, what is sitting at our back door, God bless the people who did it. And God bless those wonderful guys in the military, those teams that went in there and accomplished this regime change. It's just stunning how good they are. It's amazing how good our intel is. God bless the regime change. We got to follow up on it. We got to get it right. And if we do, maybe God will continue to bless this great country of ours. Thanks for listening.